right, good evening, everybody. Get these last tabs in place, and we can get started on Title 3. But before we do, we start each of these sessions off by reciting the preamble to the Constitution. And so let's go ahead and do that. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Once again, that is our mission statement for the United States, the things that we want to get done. Now, when the framers wrote this, their intention for providing for the common defense was not as expansive as it is today. Today we have what's commonly known as the military-industrial complex. And as we'll talk about here in a minute, that is essentially the standing army that the framers were concerned about. So how do we steer ourselves back towards closer to what the framers had intended? I'm going to read about that in the findings here in just a second. So I want to point out too, this is the now that we're into the ending the endless wars section, that this is the triple evil of Martin Luther King identified as militarism. And the thing about militarism is that it really requires othering other human beings and essentially demonizing them, where it is morally acceptable to kill and destroy them, their villages, their people, their infrastructure, their economy, and it's not a very humanity-forward position to take. Again, this is, as we're going to talk about tomorrow, the American Union is based on the principles of nonviolence, and one of those sort of fundamental principles is that every human has value, is capable of self-improvement, and so by reducing militarism, we can embrace that as a public policy for the United States, or if not embrace it, at least move closer towards it. Yeah, all right. Well, before we pull up the Trump-Biden peace plan and look at the Title 3 here, just quick update on my fast. My fast is going well. Into day 11 now. Still at 190 pounds. Been staying hydrated, keeping my electrolytes up, and generally feeling pretty good. I did introduce black tea, zero calories, minimal calories. I had a cup of black tea earlier, and maybe the caffeine helped perk me up. But the fast is going well. 14 more days to go. 2 weeks from tonight, 2 weeks from now, I'll be breaking my fast. And if you want to collectively bargain for a better social contract that ends poverty, ends mass incarceration, ends the endless wars, I invite you to join me and others around the country in a 24-hour fast on October 15th. The fast is simple. It's not complicated. Just don't eat food. Don't take any recreational intoxicants, and instead just drink water. Well, I did some black tea today, and occasionally put a slice of lemon or lime in my water for some flavor. For those last 24 hours, it'll be fast for pieces, straight water only. And as I think I've mentioned before, I get tired of drinking the salty water with my, salt and potassium to keep my electrolytes up. And so it's a nice finish to an extended fast to just drink clean, pure ice water. All right, that's how the fast is going. But it's not enough for me or a small group of people to feel at peace. We want to extend this feeling of peace to a larger part of the globe. And the United States is sort of the 800-pound gorilla on the world stage. And so we can change the way that works. Peace is popular. We talked about the polls yesterday a little bit, but peace is generally popular because most of us don't like fighting. And in fact, if you look back at at presidential elections, the peace position has frequently been the deciding factor. In 2016, Donald Trump's his commitment to ending the endless wars, it made a difference in key states where military casualties were higher than average. He got a higher than expected percentage of the vote there. Obviously, there were many factors that contributed to his election in 2016, but his campaign pledge to end the endless wars was very much a contributing factor. Before that, Richard Nixon, when he got elected in 1968, he said he was going to end the war in Vietnam. Turned out not to be true, as we're going to talk about later tonight, but it was one of the things that he very narrowly won the presidential race with 43% of the vote. It was not it was a three-way race with George Wallace in the South. But so his commitment to ending the endless wars was very popular, was decisive. Going further back than that, World War II. In 1940, just weeks before the election, when Roosevelt, FDR, was running for a third term, he promised he was going to keep us out of World War II. Obviously, he didn't keep that promise. He continued, but he was promising that. Even back before that, World War I, when Woodrow Wilson was in office running for re-election, he promised he was going to keep us out of World War I. He kept us out of war. That was what they said about him. That's why he should be reelected. Even before his second term began, he had already flip-flopped and was calling for military escalation. So the point is, peace is popular. So we can address one of the triple evils and do popular things at the same time with the Trump-Biden peace plan. All right, that's enough of that. Let me pull up the legislation here and we're going to get started. There's a bunch of sections tonight. So worst case scenario, we'll break this up and take the last section tomorrow night. But to start, let's look at the Trump-Biden peace plan. All right, scroll down. By the way, if you haven't downloaded your copy of the legislative package yet, you can do it at the link below. And everything in the table of contents is a clickable link to bring us to the right section in this 311-page package. It is very handy to be able to skip around like that. All right, section 301 is our findings and purpose. And so we're going to start with this. Congress finds the following. 1. Americans have a constitutional duty to provide for the common defense, a large concern to the framers who had recently fought a protracted war of independence from one of the most powerful nations in Europe. After the Constitution was proposed to the states, Delaware promptly ratified it because, as a small state with a large coastline, it was particularly vulnerable. They recognized that a union of states could accomplish more than individual and independent states could. 2. Military spending serves as an important role in our economy, serving as a source of income in all congressional districts. This can be better addressed directly with the creation of universal American union jobs in this act, which will offset the reduced military spending in most local economies. 3. Military service has long been a source of pride among the American people. However, when it crosses the line into glorification, it can create cultural assumptions towards virtuous violence. According to journalist Matt Taibbi, these themes have contributed to a rise in mass shootings. 4. As America's global military footprint has grown, the moral high ground that we held after World War II has been lost. Decades of detentions in Guantanamo Bay military prison have tarnished our reputation for justice, and the use of economic sanctions against civilian populations has caused countless civilian deaths across the globe. 5. The servicemen and women who return home from our hundreds of foreign military bases around the planet are sometimes traumatized by the experience of playing at being the world's policeman. In the 2 decades since 9/11, nearly 50,000 have taken their own lives. 6. The Earth is also harmed by these exploits, which require prodigious amounts of fossil fuels. The emissions of the U.S. military make it the largest single producer of greenhouse gases on the planet, even exceeding the national output of industrialized nations like Sweden and Denmark. Industrial chemicals scar the land at and around former military bases. 7. These problems may not have been the exact ones the framers were concerned about in 1787, but they did have a general aversion to standing armies. They tried to limit them in the Constitution by prohibiting Congress from appropriating money for the Army for more than 2 years at a time. In the century since, however, and especially in the last 80 years, military spending has grown to such an extent that it exceeds our constitutional mandate. The purpose of this title is to provide for the common defense in a manner closer to the framers' intention. So after the Constitution was ratified, there was talk about including a prohibition on standing armies in the Bill of Rights. It was framers like Eldridge Gerry. He was the future governor of Massachusetts and the guy who gave us the term gerrymandering. But he called a standing army the bane of liberty. And this wasn't a new concept either. This idea had been around for a while, 100 years earlier. Britain's glorious revolution in 1688, it had resulted in the adoption of a Bill of Rights, which declared, quote, "The raising or keeping a standing army within the kingdom in times of peace, unless it be with the consent of Parliament, is against the law." The thing about standing armies is, well, we've talked about supply and demand a lot when it came to things like the drug war and abortions and things like that, right? And so if you have a huge supply of soldiers, and the United States has millions of them, and a huge supply of military bases, then you find things to spend them on, to use them on. And it incentivizes us to be involved in conflicts around the world. Now, some of these, and some of them, some of them are of questionable moral judgment, let's say. But there are lots of opportunities where we could be a force for peace around the world. Countries like Sudan, right? Right now, Sudan, there's a civil war going on that has 23 million people on the brink of a famine. The entire country is so destabilized. But does the United States step in and say, hey, we're going to restore peace here? We don't. We give billions of dollars a year to Israel, and essentially we give them gift cards for the military industrial complex, so that they have to spend $3 billion a year with our defense contractors. And you can certainly argue that is building up, that has contributed to the destabilization that we're seeing very much in the news today. So Title III it's inspired by this constitutional duty to provide for the common defense, but recalibrating for the 21st century, bringing us back closer to what the framers intended. And so Section 311 is a sunset of the 2001 authorization for military force. Now, this was passed 3 days after the attacks of Israel, the attacks of September 11th, SGAR 23. And it says, it's very short. It says, in general, that the president is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11th, 2001, or harbored such organizations or person, in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. Okay? It's been, well more than 20 years, and we've done it. We've done it. Osama bin Laden has been dead for more than a decade. He's been dead longer than more than half of the time that this resolution has been in force. It's time to repeal this, because this 2001 authorization is doing a lot of heavy lifting in the world. According to the Friends Committee on National Legislation, it has been used to justify actions in at least 19 countries. They said, quote, 2001 authorization for military force is the legal basis used to justify all current wars. For this reason, it is often called the blank check for endless wars. So, if we're going to end the endless wars, we need to stop payment on a check written back in 2001. This does not immediately repeal the 2001 authorization for military force. That, as we just said, it's being used to support a lot of military actions, but not under the guidance of Congress. Again, the way the framers structured things was that while the president was commander-in-chief, Congress had the power to declare war. Congress controlled the purse strings. And so what this section 311 does, I'll show it in just a second here, but it comes from an amendment that Congresswoman Barbara Lee offered in 2017 that would sunset this in 240 days. And so that would be June 30th, 2025. That authorization for military force would go away. So 8 months. Congress would have 8 months to decide which of the endless wars should be authorized, and if they feel they should be authorized, then they can pass an authorization for military force. But this idea that Congress passed something in 2001 and we can just keep using that forever is ridiculous. Congress is, once again, failing to set national policy the way that it is supposed to. Congress is failing in their duty. So let us incentivize them to do their duty and decide where the U.S. should be involved militarily across the world. I think it's worth mentioning that the Congress in the past felt more strongly about this. They passed the War Powers Act in 1973 because they found out that President Nixon was bombing Cambodia during the Vietnam War and didn't tell Congress about it. And so Nixon vetoed it, but the necessary 2/3 overrode it. And basically it says if the president sends troops, attacks another country, you've got to notify Congress within 48 hours. And it can't go for more than 60 days unless there's an authorization for military force or a declared war. So this will restore that balance. Seeing no questions in the chat, that is what this one will do. All right. I'm just going to show you again because this is super short. It's just one paragraph that it'll be repealed effective June 30th. And then section 312 is also very short. This is an immediate repeal for the Iraq wars. The 2002 use of military force and the 1991 use of military force. 1991 authorization is clearly not needed anymore. And as far as the 2002 authorization for military force, the Senate came out in support of this. The President Biden came out in support of repealing this because the White House said this is no longer needed. The House passed it, and nothing happened. It just sat there. So we're going to repeal that, straight repeal. It doesn't really do anything today, although in the early days of 2020, Donald Trump used it to justify the assassination of Iranian General Soleimani. Even if it hadn't existed, I'm sure that he would have found authority under the 2001 authorization for military force. But these are definitely no longer needed, and they should be repealed. The White House supports it, and so that's what Section 312 does. All right, Section 313, cutting the military budget by 1/3. It seems like every year the military budget goes up. And so what this section does is over 4 consecutive years, cuts the military budget by 10%. So although Congress hasn't passed a budget for fiscal year 2025, whatever they do in fiscal year 2026, that amount that could be spent would be reduced by 10%. In 2027, reduced by another 10%. In 2028, another 10%. 2029, another 10%. And then we've got sort of the trying, again, military spending is popular, as we talked about, because that money gets pushed out into every congressional district. So as sort of lock this, subsection E says it shall not be in order in either chamber to consider any amendment to the authorizations in this section unless 2/3 of the members voting on a roll call vote agree to amend these provisions of law. So if there is something serious, World War III breaks out, something like that, this is how Congress can get around these caps. But by default, 10% a year works out to 1/3 over 4 years. Let me show this chart. Yeah, if you can see this, military spending keeps increasing. This is under President Biden. Military spending increased under President Trump as well, but it's up more than $200 billion, a fifth of $1 trillion over the last 4 years. Military spending has so there is plenty of, I want to say, waste that can be cut. Defense contractors are making exorbitant profits. There's many opportunities for the military to do things more efficiently, and knowing that they no longer will have a blank check for increased spending will spur that sort of innovation. It's also worth noting what's happened to social and economic spending. It has, in the last 2 years, while military spending has increased by increased by $1 billion and about 150 billion. But social and economic spending has decreased by $100 billion. So that money that is going to the military-industrial complex can be better spent addressing issues here at home. It can be better spent in improving the quality of life for Americans instead of, at best, investing in weapons that hopefully we'll never need, or being used around the world to, in many cases, destabilize things. So by reducing the budget, it will require more prioritization and making judgments. Again, supply and demand. If we reduce the supply, we'll have to better focus on where the U.S. military presence is better needed. It's a quote from Martin Luther King that I'd like to read, and again, it's relevant to this, the othering This is from his Beyond Vietnam speech 1 year before his assassination. And so he offered a better vision to America. And he said, "A true revolution of values will lay hand on the world order and save war. This way of settling differences is not just. This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of people normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. America, the richest and most powerful nation in the world, can well lead the way in this revolution of values. There is nothing except a tragic death wish to prevent us from reordering our priorities so that the pursuit of peace will take precedence over the pursuit of war." Yes, we can reorder our priorities, and that is what this legislative package, that is what the collective demand of the American Union from voters across the country coming together can persuade Washington to do. The peace vote can be decisive, and so we've needed a better way to organize for political power. And so a union is the way to do it. And as military spending has increased, they keep buying stuff. And so then the question is, what do we do with all that stuff? And one of the things that they do is give it away to police departments, to law enforcement. And so that brings us to section 314. And this would repeal the 1033 program. If you're not familiar with it, it is a program that offers a deal that, when I was growing up, you'd see on a late night infomercial that it's free, just pay shipping. And this is a program that funnels military surplus into law enforcement. That includes equipment like grenade launchers, mine-resistant armored troop carriers, things that would be rare at best for that a police department would need. But it very much contributes to the militarization for police. Again, supply and demand. If you increase the supply of military-grade weapons in the hands of the police force, they will find reasons to use them. In the same way, if you give a small boy a hammer, everything will look like a nail. This is a program that goes back to the 1990s and very much rooted in the war on drugs. And so again, the militarization of the police, this, you got SWAT raids, you've got no-knock warrants, and over the last 20 years, deaths by police have trended upward, right? We're 1,000 Americans a year are getting killed by police. So by de-escalating, by not contributing to their continued militarization, we can address this. I don't know if we talked about, did we talk about this last night? But ending the 1030, I think we did, it was on the list, 1033 program. So majority of respondents in June 2020 supported ending this program. What else? And so what is the cost of giving these things away for free? Well, once the military has given them away, they can buy new ones. So what this really is, this is a subsidy for defense contractors, right? Hey, military, you guys, why don't you buy an extra mine-resistant armored troop carrier, and then you can give one away with the 1033 program. So this will repeal the 1033 program. Pull up the screen here real quick, and it is just that. Section. Strike it from the table of contents. there are other there doesn't the next section, 2576, is the sale. So the military could still sell surplus to law enforcement. They just couldn't give it away. And I should point out too, fire departments are under a different section, so we don't have a problem with the militarization of the fire department. The military could still give surplus to the fire departments. And military animals, dogs, horses, mules, donkeys, those are kind of covered under a different section of law, so you could still give away those. It's the military equipment that, the military equipment, that program would be ended. It's been proposed in Congress that maybe we could just restrict it, right? We could be more strict about what exactly could be given away, right? Let's say, all right, no mine-resistant armored personnel carriers, no explosives, no grenade launchers. The problem is it still leaves the door open. And so it is cleaner to just say, stop giving the police military equipment. If they need it, they can buy it, but let's stop giving it away. So one of the side effects of this is that, I want to say in its zeal to get rid of these things, they don't always do their due diligence. In 2017, the General Accountability Office, they threw up a fake law enforcement website with a fake address, and they started getting equipment from the Defense Department. Yeah, so we can do better. From a couple years ago, the ACLU reported that over 8,000 jurisdictions had received over $7 billion worth of military equipment. I'm sure that number has increased in the last 2 years. So, all right, well, that is what Section 314 does. Section 315, now we're getting into the reducing America's global military footprint. And this section would, I guess, let's start with what's the problem. Let's identify. The issue is that the United States has about 750 foreign military bases around the globe. That includes, tens of thousands of troops stationed in Europe, about 30,000 in Germany, 50 to 50,000 in Japan, 26,000 in South Korea, and then enough, tens of thousands in the Persian Gulf. So we've got all of these foreign military bases all across the globe. And again, this can destabilize things, right? If your next door neighbor got a AR-15 and started pacing back and forth in front of your house, it would probably make you nervous. It would probably make you think, hey, maybe I should go out and get my own gun to defend myself in case this guy does something. And so the massive spread of our foreign military bases contributes to the militarization of the globe. It's good business for the arms manufacturers, but it's not good news for people who want peace, which again is most of us. So reducing this number of foreign military bases is essential to ending the endless wars. But we can do it. We can do it with dignity, death with dignity for the military-industrial complex. Once again, this is a legislative package, and so when it comes to foreign policy, there's an awful lot of nuance to it. So while we can't pick and choose and say close that one, that one, that one, that one. Instead, we're going to do this, as I said, with principle. We talked a couple nights ago about the rape exemption for post-viability abortions, and said the principle is the woman has to have an opportunity to consent to whether or not she's going to carry the fetus, the baby, to term. She has to have an opportunity, and if she didn't get that, we're not going to take it away from her by prohibiting a post-viability abortion unless she's had a chance. All right, so the same principle of consent applies to these foreign military bases. Do the local people want us there? Do they want American soldiers as neighbors? And so what this legislation does under Section 315 is it sets up a requirement for the Secretary of Defense to hold referendums, to ask the local people, do you want us here? And if they, share my screen again, if they say no, then we respect their decision. Say, okay, we'll leave. So let's go ahead and look at the legislative text here real quick. All right, no later than October 30th, 2025. So within 1 year, shall the Secretary of Defense shall hold local referenda, and the question put to the native population shall be substantially, do you want the United States military to remain here? As we know, the way you phrase questions can impact the kind of answers that you get in return. And so this is a positive phrasing, right? People are more likely to say yes to something than to say no to something in general. So depending on how you phrase it. So this is phrased not in a leading way, but in a positive way. Do you want the United States military to remain here? Now, when we hold these referenda, the Secretary should demonstrate American democracy in the best possible way, use secret ballots in such manner to prevent intimidation, coercion, or reprisals, print them in local language or languages, publicize them for no less than 60 days before voting concludes, and include both men and women of adult age to the fullest extent possible, in a pool of eligible voters, residential population within 5 miles of the base, business owners, local residents who work on the base, residents of any large villages, towns, cities within 5 to 15 miles, and anyone else with ties to the base that the Secretary sees fit. So these are very local referendums, not national ones. And the Secretary shall seek cooperation and approval of the local government in holding the referenda. It says shall seek. So it is not, the requirement is on the Secretary of Defense to hold the elections. So that is the policy at the end of the day. Again, this is about changing policy. All right, after completing the referenda, but by the end of 2025, so at least within 2 months when voting closes, the Secretary shall develop a base closure plan for all bases where a minority of ballots indicated they want the U.S. military to maintain their presence. So again, we're pitching this in a way, do you want the United States to stay? If a minority say yes, then in that case, we develop a base closure plan to be implemented by October 30th, 2026. So got 1 year to hold a vote, and then 1 more year to respect people's decisions. That's it. Ask the local people if they want us there, and respect their decisions. That is what Section 321 does. All right, seeing no questions in the chat. Section 321. Now we get into de-escalation of nuclear proliferation. Let's just start with the findings as long as we're here. Congress finds the operational life of the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles can be safely extended at least until 2040. The research, development, testing, and evaluation of the ground-based strategic deterrent program can be paused until 2032. The existing nuclear arsenal is capable of producing damage far in excess of anything that rational adults should want to inflict on other human beings. And the purpose of this part is to lead by example on the world stage and avoid another nuclear arms race. That's a good framework. So let's just talk about our nuclear framework, right? There's a nuclear triad. We have the intercontinental ballistic missiles, we have nuclear weapons on subs, and we have nuclear weapons with bombers. And so those are the 3 ways that nuclear weapons can be deployed. do we need the intercontinental ballistic missiles? There is testimony from former Defense Secretary William Perry. He wrote an op-ed saying why it's safe to scrap America's ICBMs. Because here's the thing about intercontinental ballistic missiles, they are buried in the ground. They do not move, they cannot dodge, they just sit there. And so the enemy knows exactly where your weapons are. Now when it comes to the bombers and the subs, they move around, they're mobile. But when it comes to the ICBMs, they are sitting ducks. And that is sort of the point, is that they that they are sitting ducks, because that way they don't what was I going to say? They're sitting ducks, and so they're intentional targets, because they don't put these intercontinental ballistic missiles in places like, the east coast of the United States. They put them out in flyover country, right? They put them out in Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Wyoming. They put them out there in the middle of nowhere, so that in the case of a nuclear war, the enemy, the attacker, would have to burn some of its stockpile, bombing these places in the middle of, not quite the middle of nowhere, but in the heartland of the United States, instead of the more populated areas. So that's definitely one of their purposes. There is another purpose for having these intercontinental ballistic missiles, the missile silos, being out there, and that is push money out into those places, right? Again, the military-industrial complex puts money out into every congressional district. And when there's not a lot of other economic opportunities in rural places, getting the missiles, getting military money is an injection of money into the economy. In Montana, I forget which region it is, but like a third of their economic activity comes from the military, or as a result of military spending. Because, all right, so with these missile silos, you got a couple of guys who get paid to sit there. You keep people sitting there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and have for decades, just in case a key needs to be turned. And, well, when those guys are going to sit there, before they go to get, go underground for their shifts, they stop at the local diners, they buy food, they buy drinks, whatever. And so they support the local economy. A couple of years ago, I guess it's more than a couple of years ago now, during the last round of nuclear de-escalation talks, the New START treaty, I think it was, President Obama agreed that we were going to close some of these missile bases, and we're going to close missile silos. And so rather than close them in like one concentrated area, so you could just close off that section, the Missile Caucus states, who benefit economically from having these silos in their states, they got together and they persuaded, they were able to use their leverage in Congress to make sure that the closing of those missile silos was done in the most economically inefficient way possible. That while the silos would be closed, they wouldn't be filled in with concrete and turned into more productive land. They would still be maintained just in case, right? In case we ever won't need them again. And so that economic stimulus would still be going to those Missile Caucus states. So what else? So what's going on with our missiles? Well, the one we have now, we've got a lot of these Minuteman III missiles, that were built decades and decades ago, and we have they could be upgraded according to testimony, according to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. An Air Force official testified after they studied these options for extending the Minuteman III until 2075. They testified that one more life extension is possible before a new missile is needed. However, that's not that doesn't kick as much money to defense contractors, to the military-industrial complex, as saying, let's just build a new one. And so that's what we're in the process of doing. We're building new missiles to replace the Minuteman III. And so we are contributing to a new arms race. There's no way to win. The only way to win an arms race is to refuse to run. And so we don't have to run. Section 322 will extend the life of the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles. When it comes to upgrading the new missiles, surprise, surprise, the defense contractors have said, oh, you know what? It's going to cost more than we told you it was when we started this program. And so there was a report that came out this July that found the price had jumped by 81%. The price has gone up 81%. Again, these defense contractors pay their CEOs tens of millions of dollars. This is money that could be better spent elsewhere. Instead of we can invest in productive capacity instead of destructive capacity. So, Section 323 would prohibit any more funds going to that warhead modification program. Another quote here for you from General James E. Cartwright, former vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who had been commander of the Strategic Command. So he teamed up with a former Minuteman launch officer to write an op-ed in the New York Times in 2016. And he made this obvious observation: by scrapping the vulnerable land-based missile force, any need for launching on warning disappears. Again, if the enemy knows where your missiles are, they are sitting ducks. And so if you believe that the other side has launched missiles, you have to assume that they are coming to take out your missiles. So you've got to launch immediately. Got to get them out of their silos before it's too late. You don't have the need to make you don't have to make a hasty decision with your subs and your bombers, because the enemy, subs especially, right, doesn't know where they are. And so there's not a risk of being left unarmed if another country were to attack the United States. So you get rid of that need for launching on warning. What is the status of America's nuclear stockpile? Well, let's just review those pieces of text real quick, and then we'll get into Section 324. And I optimistically thought we could continue into the piece on the Korean Peninsula subtitle, but I think we're going to kick that until for another 2 nights. And yeah. All right. Life extension, beginning not less than 180 days after the enactment of this, shall carry out a life extension to extend the life of such missiles to 2040. A lot can happen between now and 2040 if the United and we can hope that the planet has come up with better ways of resolving differences and taking the nuclear weapons off of the table. Thought I had a link to it, but I don't see it here. A couple years ago, January 2022, the 5 founding members of the nuclear community. France, the UK, Russia, the United States, and who am I forgetting? China, got together and agreed we don't want a nuclear arms race. We need to move towards nuclear abolition, not proliferation. So this legislation will help do that. Section 322, this is the from 2025 to 2032 for expanding ground-based modification, the warhead modification program. And then we get to section 324, reduction of nuclear stockpile. We'll just lay this out real quick and then we'll talk about the numbers. So what this does is requires a warhead reduction plan for reducing by half the total number of warheads reported in 2024 by the end of 2029. So cutting the number of warheads in half. This is not nuclear abolition. This is still leaves plenty of destructive capability to do an awful lot of damage. But here's what things look like on the world stage. This is according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute yearbook for 2023. This is the state of nuclear weapons in the world. The United States has about 5,000 of them. About a third are deployed and ready to go. The rest are like in storage. Russia has about 5,500, with about a quarter deployed and the rest in storage. And the rest of the world combined, the other 7 nations that possess nuclear weapons, they only have about 1,500 between them all. Over the last year, so the United States and Russia have about 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. And so we are, by the United States committing to reducing our stockpile by half, we will still have more than the rest of the world, excluding Russia, combined, and we'll still have plenty of destructive capability, but we'll be setting an example and say, look, nobody wants an arms race. Nobody wins with a nuclear war. It is lose-lose. And you can hope that mutually assured destruction stops anyone from getting to that point, but let's de-escalate. So cutting our stockpile in half before 2030 is a reasonable place to start. Somebody's got to go first. Let it be us. Let it be us, because we are the only nation who has used nuclear weapons, atomic weapons, in war. When we dropped 2 bombs on Japan in 1945. We bombed areas that were 90% civilian and killed 200,000 people. So somebody's got to lead by example. This is our opportunity to, what did Martin Luther King, he said, America, the richest, most powerful nation in the world, can lead the way in this revolution of values. We absolutely can. What else do we need to know about reducing our stockpile? The Pentagon actually concluded a decade ago that the U.S. deterrence objectives, just how many do we need for deterring other nations, could be met with a unilateral reductions of up to 1/3 of the deployed arsenal. So we've got about 1,500 that are deployed. We could actually drop that to 1,000, according to the Pentagon a decade ago, and we'd still have enough. 1,000 is, again, it is twice as many as China has, and again, the rest of the planet, except for Russia, only has 1,500. So 1,000 would be enough to deter any attack on the United States. So reducing our total stockpile, dropping us down to 2,500 over 5 years, will not leave the United States defenseless. I should also point out that we are in fact reducing our stockpile little by little. We're down about 200 since last year, but we can do more. We can do better. We can lead by example. We can put our hand on the world order and say this way of doing things is not just. So if that's what you want to do, if you want to help end poverty, end mass incarceration, end the endless wars, the American Union wants to represent you in the 2024 election, not by running candidates, not by trying to get ourselves elected, but by collectively bargaining for a better social contract across all 470 federal races for the House, the Senate, and the Oval Office. And by coming together as a union of swing voters, again, swing voter is someone who's willing to vote for both Republicans and Democrats, we can get the leverage to force Congress to act, to make Congress actually set policy like they're supposed to be doing. We can establish the creative tension where their options are do something or face consequences, and they can do it. They have the ability. We just need to motivate them, not by trying to threaten by the threats of destruction, but by coming to offer to help them accomplish these things. You can learn more at anamericanunion.com about this framework and become a dues-paying member by contributing 25 cents a day, $7 a month. And you can help us gain influence by helping see the American Union show up in the polls. So a pollster asks you how you're going to vote in November. You insist that you are a true swing voter. You're going to vote for either the Republican or the Democrat who gets the American Union endorsement. Not because we're trying to favor one party over the other, but because we can play as a nonpartisan voting bloc, we can play incumbent versus challengers and inspire the incumbents to get this done this month to avoid the consequences at the ballot box. This is it. Come back tomorrow at 7 p.m. and we'll continue the rest of Title III. We'll cover the piece on the Korean Peninsula provisions and the Subtitle B, Improving America's Moral Standing in the World, anyways. All right, I hope to see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.